James Gunn may have just made the Supergirl situation even more complicated. After the movie's disappointing theatrical run and an equally underwhelming digital performance, Gunn is now facing a growing wave of criticism. And this time, he's reportedly asking fans and critics to forgive him for some of his past comments. But here's where things get interesting. While asking for forgiveness, Gunn is still defending the exact arguments that caused so much backlash in the first place. And with Spider-Man Brand New Day reportedly dominating the box office while DC continues trying to rebuild momentum, the contrast is becoming harder for Warner Brothers to ignore. So why is James Gunn suddenly taking this approach? What does he believe audiences got wrong about Supergirl? And why is he insisting that the movie is essential to understanding Kara Zor-El's future in the DC universe? Let's break it all down. And if you enjoy honest Hollywood and DC commentary, make sure you subscribe to the Woke Watch so you don't miss the next update. Since Supergirl's theatrical run came to an end, the conversation surrounding the movie has shifted toward what happens next. The film didn't generate the kind of theatrical momentum DC Studios was hoping for, and its digital performance has reportedly failed to completely change that narrative. Now attention is turning toward its eventual arrival on HBO Max, where the studio will have another opportunity to reach viewers who skipped the theatrical release. At the same time, James Gunn, Millie Alcock, writer Anna Nogueira, and Warner Bros. Discovery CEO David Zaslav continue facing questions about what went wrong, and the timing couldn't be more interesting. While DC is still dealing with the aftermath of Supergirl, Marvel's Spider-Man Brand New Day has reportedly been putting up enormous box office numbers, reaching around $2.1 billion worldwide and continuing to climb. Whether or not those figures ultimately hold, the comparison is obvious. One superhero franchise is generating enormous theatrical excitement, while another is trying to convince audiences that its latest major release deserves a second chance. And that's where James Gunn comes into the picture once again. Over the past several months, Gunn has repeatedly pushed back against critics of Supergirl. He's criticized what he considers unfair attacks from sections of the fandom, responded to social media criticism, and defended the people responsible for making the movie. But now his latest approach appears to be somewhat different. Instead of simply doubling down, Gunn is reportedly asking audiences to forgive him for some of the things he said during the controversy. Gunn's argument is essentially that fans and critics may not have fully understood the position he was in when he was defending his work and the people around him at DC Studios. He suggested that some of his previous comments became more aggressive than necessary, while still maintaining that he felt compelled to address what he viewed as misogynistic and sexist criticism aimed at the women involved with Supergirl. In other words, Gunn's message isn't exactly a complete retreat. It's closer to saying, I'm sorry if I went too far, but I still believe I was right to fight back. And that's precisely why this latest statement is attracting attention. Gunn argues that sometimes creators have to be forceful when dealing with online trolls and people who deliberately try to tear down their work. From his perspective, the criticism surrounding Supergirl wasn't always legitimate film criticism. He believes certain individuals crossed the line into personal attacks, particularly toward Millie Alcock and Anna Nogueira. According to Gunn, the filmmakers shouldn't simply remain silent when they believe they're being unfairly targeted. He has repeatedly framed the controversy as a larger issue surrounding modern fandom culture, arguing that the superhero genre has developed a particularly aggressive online environment where creators can become targets almost overnight. And there is certainly a distinction worth making here. Personal attacks, harassment, sexism, or genuine abuse shouldn't be defended simply because someone dislikes a movie. But that's also where Gunn's critics believe he's missing the bigger issue, because not every negative reaction to Supergirl was about Millie Alcock being a woman. A huge portion of the criticism focused on the movie itself. People questioned the screenplay. They questioned the character decisions. They questioned the casting. They questioned the structure of the story. And they questioned whether the film actually delivered the kind of emotional payoff that DC Studios had promised. Those are legitimate areas for audiences to debate. And that's why Gunn's repeated focus on misogyny and sexism has frustrated some viewers who believe their criticism is being dismissed before it's even addressed. One of the biggest examples is the criticism surrounding Millie Alcock's casting. Some viewers simply didn't believe she was the right choice for this particular interpretation of Kara Zor-El. That's a criticism of a casting decision, not necessarily an attack on Alcock personally. There's a major difference between saying an actor was miscast and attacking the actor as an individual. The same applies to Anna Nogueira. Critics have questioned her experience as a major blockbuster screenwriter and whether she was the right person to handle such an important project within the new DC universe. Again, that's something audiences are allowed to debate. Calling someone inexperienced isn't automatically an insult if the argument is specifically about their professional background and suitability for a particular production. And that's what makes Gunn's defense so controversial. Instead of spending more time addressing the actual complaints about the screenplay, story structure, character development, and world building, he continues bringing the discussion back toward online toxicity. Meanwhile, Gunn has also attempted to reassure fans that the broader DC universe is moving forward successfully. He has pointed toward projects such as Lanterns as evidence that DC Studios is still building momentum and that the long-term plan hasn't been derailed by one movie. He has even suggested that, in the long run, the DC team will have the last laugh over the people criticizing them online. But that raises another question. If Supergirl was simply misunderstood, why does Gunn need to repeatedly convince audiences to watch it? At this point, the message coming from DC Studios increasingly seems to be that audiences simply need to give the movie another chance. Watch it digitally, watch it on streaming, buy the Blu-ray, give it another opportunity. And Gunn has now gone even further by suggesting that Supergirl is important for understanding Kara's future role in the DC universe, particularly her place in the upcoming Man of Tomorrow. According to Gunn's argument, audiences who skip Supergirl could potentially find themselves confused about why Kara is involved in the next major Superman story. That's an interesting claim because it essentially turns Supergirl into required viewing for the future of the DCU. But whether the movie actually accomplishes that is another question entirely. Critics of the film argue that Supergirl's story was relatively straightforward, with limited world building and a narrative that didn't establish enough depth to justify the idea that audiences absolutely need to watch it to understand everything coming next. If Man of Tomorrow significantly expands Kara's role, then perhaps future material will make the connection clearer. But right now, simply telling audiences that they need to watch Supergirl isn't necessarily enough to convince them. And that's where the entire situation comes full circle. James Gunn is asking people to forgive him for being too aggressive toward critics, while simultaneously continuing to describe sections of those critics as trolls, keyboard warriors, bigots, misogynists, and people who simply want to destroy the work of others. That's why some viewers are interpreting this as a classic, sorry, but I'm still right situation. He's acknowledging that perhaps his delivery went too far, but he hasn't really abandoned the argument behind those comments. And whether that strategy works could have a major impact on how audiences perceive the leadership of DC Studios moving forward. Because ultimately, Supergirl doesn't just represent one movie. It represents one of the early major tests of James Gunn's new DC universe. If audiences reject the movie and remain uninterested when it reaches streaming, then the studio will have to answer much bigger questions about its creative direction, its marketing strategy, and its understanding of what modern superhero audiences actually want. But if Supergirl suddenly finds a much larger audience on HBO Max, Gunn could point to that performance as evidence that the theatrical reaction didn't tell the entire story. For now, though, the debate is still wide open. Was Supergirl unfairly attacked by a toxic section of the fandom? Or did James Gunn simply fail to acknowledge that many of the complaints were genuine criticisms of the movie itself? And perhaps most importantly, will Supergirl actually become essential viewing once Man of Tomorrow arrives? Another important angle here is that audience reactions can shift significantly after a streaming release. Many films that underperform in theaters later find a second life on OTT platforms, sometimes even developing a cult following. If Supergirl manages to perform strongly on HBO Max, the entire narrative around the movie could change. However, if it still fails to generate meaningful audience interest there, it would become a clear warning sign for DC Studios that branding and universe building alone are not enough. Strong storytelling and execution are what truly matter. And perhaps the most interesting part of all this is how divided the fandom has become. One side continues to support Gunn, arguing that he is standing up against toxic criticism, while the other believes that legitimate criticism is being unfairly dismissed and lumped together with online negativity. Those are the questions we'll be watching very closely. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you think James Gunn went too far with his attacks on critics, or do you think he had every right to defend himself and his team? And do you believe Supergirl deserves another chance on streaming? If you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to The Woke Watch, and turn on notifications for more Hollywood, Marvel, DC, and entertainment updates. I'll see you in the next one.